I mean, we had investments in companies like Weirdas, which was Veerdas's
Sure.
company, or Culture Machine, which, if you remember back from the old YouTube days, the idea was you'll have a centralized sales team which will take IPs from all these different portfolio companies
Right.
and try and go and sell in the market. What makes a writer is that they publish. Otherwise,
Yeah.
everyone else is a writer. The process is very similar, whether you're writing a screenplay or
Yeah.
you're writing anything, basically.
Sure.
Right? You get the germ of the idea, that's the protein, and you have to sort of
Yeah.
put the gravy around it.
Nice. I like that. The protein and the gravy. Yeah.
And so if you have to make your debt payments every month, every year, you will try to minimize your risk. What that translates into is to see, okay, DC universe brings us a lot of money.
So let's
just keep doing the same again. So the executives at the helm of all these studios are basically glorified debt managers.
There are very few people whom I look at on a social media application. It can be Twitter, it can be Instagram, LinkedIn. And when I look at them, I'm like, you know what? I just want to have a conversation with them. I want to pick their brain, although not in the top mate style, but I just want to have a honest, sprawling, and deep conversation. And today, on this episode of That's What She Said, which is episode 61, I finally have the opportunity to do that with Mr. Palash Kulkarni. Palash, how's it going, man?
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Exciting times. We have a very interesting conversation ahead of us. We'll be speaking about media, culture, entertainment, a bunch of topics. But I ask you to introduce yourself. How would you, would like to tell our listeners and viewers about what you do and what you've been doing so far?
Yeah, that's always been a very difficult question
Yeah.
for me to answer. I started my career as a management consultant, and when people would ask me what do they do, again, I'd been fixed because it's very difficult to describe what management consultants do. But right now, I think I would call myself a writer, creator, mostly writer, because most of the things that I do involve writing of some kind. So writer, creator. I also help others like you
Yeah.
sort of create.
Yeah.
Especially people who are founders or companies who have
Absolutely.
never created and don't know how to start, how to begin.
Yeah. Yeah.
I help them, but that's on the side. Mostly,
Yeah.
I am a writer, and that's what I want to build a career in. I just want to be a creator myself, and that's what my focus is. Has been for the last 2 years, and
Sure.
will be perhaps for the rest of my life.
Amazing. Wow, that's such a bold claim, because being a writer, again, it's initially what people used to see as writer, the first thing that comes to mind is a screenwriter, right? When you think of writer, especially in Mumbai, the Warsaw Gang, or you think of a journalist, which is a long form journalist. But I think a new media creator, Palash, which is just so interesting and so it's refreshing, I would say, and we really need more writers of your caliber. But speaking about caliber, I actually want to talk to you about your internship and you went to IIT Bombay. I remember I read this piece of yours about Fedra and your relationship with Fedra, and how you sort of were giving the JEE exams or those quadratic equations, and you had that sort of path that, okay, you know what, I want to go to an IIT, and you ended up going to pretty much the most premier institution, which is IIT Bombay. But there, along with staying in those cramped but home-like hostels, you worked at Hotstar, right? Which is, I mean, definitely even today one of the most recognized and most respected streaming platforms. Of course, there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes as we speak. But what was that like? What was interning at Hotstar like?
So I didn't work from IIT Bombay at Hotstar. I worked from Bain.
From Bain, correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
It was an externship, what
Right.
they call, which
Right.
is you basically are still part of Bain, but for
Right.
6 months you go and work for some other company.
Sure.
And then you come back and whatever, serve your bond period.
Right.
So my first job was at Bain from my college.
Sure.
But I was very clear that I wanted to sort of be in the creative space, be in the
Right.
media and entertainment industry.
Right.
But I didn't have anything to show.
Was it a Mumbai thing though? Like, was it because you were in Mumbai that became a thing, or how was that?
Yeah, I mean, so when I cleared JEE, you basically get to choose your stream and the college.
Right.
And for me, it was very clear that I wanted to go to IIT Bombay. And the reason which I didn't share at that time, because people would have thought I'm crazy, is because I wanted to be in the creative industry.
Okay,
Obviously, I was going to
interesting.
the diametrically opposite
Sure,
place
sure,
if I
sure.
wanted to be in the creative industry, but that was the rationale for picking IIT Bombay.
Right,
So I was very clear even before I joined
right,
campus, and
right.
so in campus also uh, I kept writing, I directed plays, I made films,
Nice.
so all of that continued, and by the end of it, I got a job offer at Bain, and but now, I always wanted to be in the creative industry, but I didn't have the courage or guts to, first of all, say no to that offer, which was
Right,
very seductive and very
right,
attractive,
right. Of course.
and directly jump into this industry where
Sure.
I'd had to sort of build a career from scratch. But I didn't let that dream sort of die.
Mm.
Always, it was always at the back of my
Sure,
mind that I
sure,
wanted to do it.
sure.
Usually, the career path is that when you join a consulting firm
Yeah,
out of an undergrad, you
yeah.
basically do an MBA and do
Sure.
the whole nine yards. But so from Bain, I got this opportunity to go work at Hotstar for 6 months,
Mm.
and that was sort of my, just
Foot in the
checking the
door.
space
Sure.
exactly. But again, it wasn't on the creative side because again, I didn't have anything to show for it.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I had written plays and
Plays,
directed
but
films in college, but
yeah,
that doesn't count for
yeah.
anything. And so I joined in the strategy department. So this
Okay.
was the time when Hotstar Premium hadn't really been launched. It was
Mm.
mostly the free tier.
Right,
And we were just about to launch the premium sort of segment. And I worked very closely in launching that.
right,
But my eyes were set on the creative side, right? Because that was my ulterior motive. But
right.
anyway, I got a very good lay of the land of the industry,
Mm.
loved my time there. Uh, and so I decided that, I think I'm ready to sort of take the plunge.
Right.
And then, so that was my time at Hotstar. It wasn't, the original sort of, hadn't really taken off. I think the team had just been instituted.
Mm.
So mostly, Indian streamers were not making original content then.
Oh wow. Okay.
So this
Way
was
back.
just the very, the first few, the beginning of,
This is Sacred Games era. Is it like
yeah. So Sacred Games probably came around the same time.
sure?
And that's when Hotstar also had their,
Yeah.
but Hotstar was basically, if you remember, Hotstar had the entire HBO library.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yes.
So Game of Thrones was huge. Succession had just come in
Right.
when I was
Right.
there, and all these HBO shows, and also Disney, Marvel, and all that.
Of course.
So it was a lot of fun. I got a brief understanding of the business of the media and entertainment industry, and really loved it. And I decided to to take the next step, which was to join this company called Rainshine Entertainment,
Right. Right.
which was like a holding company that invested in other media companies.
Interesting. How does that work, though? I mean, and because historically we've always seen that media is a space where not a lot of sort of investment happens in terms of okay, you know what, you won't get good multiples. It's difficult to. I mean,
Yeah.
sure, you might scale, but our ARPUs are obviously average revenue per user for the uninitiated. Are scaringly low. So how does that work for an investment perspective? Like, what do you how does that entire system work?
So this was also the time when the entire streaming industry was taking off,
Mm.
right? And a lot of creators and content producers had gotten this complete completely new domain of expressing themselves, right?
Right.
And so that's the time when Rainshine sort of started doing this, right? And the idea was, so they had investments in, I mean, we had investments in companies like Weirddas, which was Weirdas's
Sure. Sure.
company, or Culture Machine, which, if you remember back from the old YouTube days, had brands like Being Indian, Blush.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the idea was that and so it was not a VC style investment where you
Right.
take a minority stake,
Right. Right.
but this was mostly majority investments or complete buyouts. And then you
Okay.
sort of operate the company to this was more like PE style investment, where
Okay.
the
Sure.
company comes in, operates the company,
Right.
increases efficiency in operations,
Sure.
and then tries to exit later.
Exit later. Interesting.
And the idea was, so for example, Culture Machine was doing mostly YouTube stuff. The
Yeah.
idea was, okay, can we increase the margins by
Yeah.
making shows for streaming platforms?
Super.
And because we had a bunch of these investments, the idea was you'll have a centralized sales team,
Okay.
which will take IPs from all these different portfolio companies
Right.
and try and go and sell in the market.
Absolutely.
That was the broad. And there were other very interesting investments. I don't know if you remember this this not newsletter, but this publication called 52.in.
Of course, the 52. Yes,
Correct.
yes,
So
yes.
that was one of our investments, right? So
Ah,
and they started doing these really
long form. Absolutely. Yes,
and
yes.
really good pieces, like
Yes,
amazing pieces,
100%.
some of the best long form
I've,
journalism that you would have seen
I've
in the last.
100% agreed. 100%.
So that was one of our investments. The idea there was that because the streaming thing had taken off, that perhaps streamers would be interested in buying or optioning the rights for the stories that these guys were doing.
Right.
And that did end up happening in some small way, but
Right.
the entire thesis was this: a new form of media had opened
Yeah.
up. How can you sort of leverage this and try to spin a business?
Absolutely. I remember the entire time when it was like, when of course AIB was also sort of a pioneer in the space in the mid 2010s, you can say. And it was fascinating how a lot of the brands now, of course, you have the content to commerce game. Some players play that game, right? And obviously didn't work out too well. You see Good Glam Group pretty much right now, they're not doing too well. But I loved how that was a foresight that, okay, well, this is new media, this is here to stay, people are consuming this, and how about we sort of do investments here. Even folk media was also doing a bunch of interesting channels with Mashable, with a bunch of other investments that they made. So that was there. And what were you doing there, Palash? Like, what was your sort of main role there?
Again, my ulterior motive was to be on the creative side, to be involved in productions and everything. But I wasn't hired for that, obviously. I was hired for investing and strategy. So that was my role, right? So I worked with a bunch of these companies, helped their operations, but my thing was, okay, how can I sort of stealthily go over to the creative?
Sure.
That's what I ended up doing. That's where I sort of produced my first podcast and wrote it, directed it. It was a fiction podcast,
Right.
Which Audible bought.
Super.
And that's where I sort of, opened up my arms,
Right.
let my wings out, and started dabbling in the creative side, which I was anyway doing before, right? So, my whole thing was that on weekends I would read, I would write, I would put stuff out.
Right.
I also made short films on the side while I was working
Super.
with Bain and all. But it's very, the monthly salary is very seductive.
It is, right? That SMS. I think it's all about the SMS that you get, right?
Exactly, right?
At the end of the month.
At the beginning of the month. So I wasn't gutsy enough to sort of leave that behind. And Rainshine sort of allowed me to continue with that, but still dabble on the... Rainshine in many ways was my dream job.
Right.
Because I basically, when I was thinking of joining the creative industry after Hotstar, I was like, okay, what's my dream job?
Yeah.
And my dream job was, okay, I want to be in the business of, I want to be in the creative industry, while still on the sort of salary I was on.
Sure.
And I knew that job doesn't exist.
Sure.
But along came Rainshine. It happened, but at some point, you have to take the leap of faith. You have to take that risk, which is what I did 2 years back, and I cut the cord and I'm a full-time creator now.
And folks, this is where I think I want to plug in and almost introduce to the world the gem of a newsletter, right? How do you pronounce it though? Because of course, we read it as a bigger splash, or because it's obviously a play on your name. But is it, how do you say it? Like, how would you say it in your words?
I haven't actually ever said it out loud. It's a bigger... It's a very stupid name. It's because there's a film called A Bigger Spalash.
Right.
And because my name is Palash, it was just like one letter and
one letter
on my name. It's also because I am physically very big.
Right.
And so it just stuck, and it's a stupid name that stuck. It's just A Bigger Spalash.
A Bigger Spalash. Okay, A Bigger Spalash. Then, folks, we on the first time ever we've heard what's the newsletter actually sounds like, right from the horse's mouth. But I want to really highlight this one piece, Palash, that really became, I would say, your your de facto sort of central piece, or your tent pole, right, or your crowd puller. This was your Inception, or this was your Pulp Fiction, or this is, like, you can draw many parallels here. But I want to speak about All Risk is Creative, right, where you obviously drew some very interesting parallels between A24 and the venture space. And I'm someone, again, who's very interested. I've worked with extensively in the venture space, although in the marketing side of venture, and I've obviously worked with film companies and production houses as well. So that piece was extremely refreshing, something that people still keep talking about. Tell us a bit about that. Tell us about that piece. What was the response? What was the first time you saw that, okay, this is getting eyeballs? What was that like?
It was, I mean, the genesis of that piece was actually, it was a piece that was supposed to be on A24, because that's a company that I've
Sure,
loved, right?
sure.
The films that I've loved. And as I was writing the piece, I realized that it's very similar to what A16Z had done in the VC space. I'd recently read about A16Z's inception and how they started. And what I realized is, as I started exploring the parallels between the two,
Right.
is the strategy that A24 was using, which is, okay, we are not going to make these tentpoles. We're not going to make $100 million dollar films, but what you're going to do is we're going to make 20, $25 million films, right?
Yeah.
And the idea is that not all of them are going to work. But if we just get the pulse of the culture right, maybe one or two of those 20 will work,
Yeah.
and that will return the money on all the 20.
Absolutely.
Right. So it's a classic VC
Power law.
about it, right?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so that was the first paradigm, right? And then I kept looking and I saw, okay, these two companies are very similar, more than what they look on the surface.
Sure.
Right? So like for example, the idea of packaging, like when A16Z started, they didn't only want to give you capital, but they also wanted to sort of hook you up with the who's who of the industry, the experts,
Sure.
so that you get all the sort of.
Sure.
And that's what A24 was doing, in a way that because they picked up these young creators, young filmmakers and directors who were making indie films otherwise,
Right.
and opened up access to someone like Adam Sandler for
Yeah.
Safdie Brothers.
Of
Right?
course.
And not only that, but they also, if the film sort of does well, they also erected these very expensive Oscar marketing campaigns to ensure that their talent got the Oscar, or at least got the nomination.
Sure.
They did a very good job of that. Right?
Absolutely.
And so those were the parallels I was about to write. And I called it All Risk is Creative because essentially it was the whole idea for A24 was, how do you allocate risk? And it was more of risk allocation, and that involved your creative thinking on what concepts could work, and what, if even if we hit 2 out of 20, that's good enough.
Yeah.
And that's why the title. And I think it got a lot of interest from the venture space, from sort of the movie space. And it's one of those articles that, because it's out in the air, and because enough people have read it, people keep coming in, people keep reading it, and it just keeps sort of bringing me newer readers and newer
subscribers.
audience. And so much so, and we'll probably talk about it later, is I'm starting a podcast, and the name of the podcast is All Risk is Creative Podcast, because the article got sort of somewhat popular. I just thought that this idea is so much more general and so much broader, and it encompasses so many more things, that it's a good framing for the podcast that I've been working on for quite a while now. So yeah, I think that piece was very important. It's not my favorite piece.
It's not your favorite piece. Okay, that's interesting. Because we were just discussing that before in a little pre-chat that we were having. That often it so happens, and you can, I think this goes for directors, writers, that their most popular piece is not their most favorite piece. So I want to ask you, Palash, I've read pretty much, I wouldn't say the entire catalog of your Substack, but I've read pretty much, most of it, of course. What is your favorite, and why? Why would you say, whatever is your favorite? Why do you say so?
It's very, like, for example, recently, because it keeps popping up in my notifications bar, the All Risk is Creative piece, I read it recently, and like it always happens when you read, I wrote it probably a year back, almost, give or take a year back, and there are just some things that make you cringe, that make you wince. God, I don't like this line. I could have written something else. And so I'd give you a very diplomatic answer, which is, my favorite piece is the last one that I've written. And I'm glad that's the case, because then it just shows you that,
there's been growth.
The last piece I wrote was about Indian, and how Indian culture is very risk averse. And why there are civilizational and cultural and political reasons for it. I know it has got nothing to do with media as such, but that's another theme that I'm very interested
Sure.
in.
Risk in general, I feel like
Risk
that's,
in general,
yeah,
yeah. I mean,
because you
that's
also
been,
sort of faced it yourself. I think that's
yes,
something, yeah,
exactly, right? I mean,
yeah,
it comes from a very personal space
yeah,
because I think I am someone who's very risk averse.
yeah,
Uh, I took a very essential risk about 2 years back, and I think I'm very glad that I did it. And when I reflect back on all those years when I was very risk averse, I always tell myself that, my God, I could have done it before. I could have done
right,
it earlier.
right,
So yeah, risk has been a very important theme that I've been thinking about,
right,
and I think it is in general a very important
yeah,
thing to think about, because that's what, all progress depends on someone taking risk,
absolutely, yeah,
uh, and that's what the podcast is also about. And
sure,
uh, and it's a very, I mean, there are many writers who've written about risk from all types of
yeah,
backgrounds. There are
yeah,
people from investing, people from media, people from all sorts of
yeah,
domains have written
yeah,
about risk, because I think it is a very fundamental concept
yeah,
that goes to the very depth of what it is to live a human life.
super, wow,
So yeah, I think
yeah,
it's something which I think I'll keep exploring for many,
yeah.
many more years to come.
That's very interesting, and I think again, be it entrepreneurship as well, risk is something I myself, cut the cord as it were.
Yeah.
2 years ago, I had a full time job as a podcaster, funnily enough. But I was like, okay, let me sort of venture on my own. So that risk is has sort of paid off its dividends for sure, and it's been a fascinating journey. Um, I actually want to know more now about your, you spoke about the pieces that you've written and how you've sort of grown as a writer. Would love to know the process, right? Because the way I sort of go about my writing, I of course has I mean, I have a newsletter as well. It's linked in the description box below. For the audio listeners, it's also
Very
linked
good
below.
newsletter at
Thank
that.
you, thank you so much. That's called Shrimail, right? And it's also around. It's short, but it sort of gives you a pulse on what's happening in the world of pop culture and how to make sense of it. So my process is simple. That I have this. This is what I want to talk about. I think of a title, 10 points I think about, and then I sort of work on those 10 points, 10 beats, essentially the beat structure, quite simple. Do you have something which is, and I usually, my writing process is very focused. In the morning, I'm a morning person through and through. So from 7 to 9, it's my most fertile ground where I keep getting the flow. Do you have any tricks or any, I won't say hacks, because a hack is itself such a hacky term, but any best practices that you follow or any structures that you like?
What works for me is, usually it's the germ of an idea that I get,
Yeah.
and what I try and do is, I don't put pen to paper right away. I
Okay.
just like let it simmer inside
Yeah, let
me.
it ruminate. Yeah.
Yeah, and just like for about, I mean, if it's a, I'm also writing. I mean, I'm also writing a screenplay, right? A show which hopefully will be out by the end of this year on a proper streamer. Can't talk much about it because the NDA prevents me from.
Sure.
But uh, the process is very similar, whether you're writing a screenplay or you're writing a piece like a non-fiction essay, or
Yeah.
you're writing uh, like anything basically,
Sure.
right? Which is, you get the germ of the idea. That's the idea around which the entire, that's the protein, and you have to sort of
Yeah.
put the gravy around it.
Nice. I like that. The protein and the gravy. Yeah. Nice.
I don't start typing right away. I let it sort of be at the back of my mind, and I go about my life as it were. And ideas sort of keep coming, and then
Nice.
it reaches a stage where I can't help but write. And I think that's a very good stage to be in, because then words are just like spilling
Yeah.
out of you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and
Interesting.
then once it's on paper, it's just reading and rereading and just like re-editing till
Yeah.
it's sort of, I call it, till it becomes like music to the ears, which is
Wow. It
uh,
has to have a
it
rhythm.
just flows. Like sometimes when you read a very good piece, you almost get the feeling that you're not reading, but it's like you already know what it
Yeah. The
is.
piece is happening to you almost.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
seamlessly flowing
Yeah.
inside your consciousness. That's what I like, and that's where I think the magic is.
Super.
Uh, so once I put pen to paper, it's just that process again and again and again till I sort of get that feeling,
Right.
and then I just hit publish, knowing that, that's the thing, that even with the screenplay that I'm writing, is time is the most important
Yeah.
resource in
Yeah.
writing, right?
Yeah.
Like, I could have still written the all risk is creative piece for the year that followed, right?
Yeah.
And it would have gotten better. But at some point, you just have
You
to
have
cut the
to
cord and publish, right?
publish.
I think I read somewhere that what makes a writer is that they publish. Otherwise,
Yeah. Yeah.
everyone else is a writer.
Everyone
right?
else is a writer.
And so you just have to sort of
Yeah.
take the leap of faith and publish. So that's the process, yeah. I walk a lot.
Nice. Okay.
Most
Interesting.
of my that's I can't think without walking for some reason.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
Call it undiagnosed ADHD or
No, I think
but
walking is it's really it's I mean it's got actual scientific proof that it
yeah,
helps you with
exactly, right. And
yeah.
so my writing is mostly like 90% walking and 10% typing.
Love
And
it.
I always joke that God forbid if I were to be incapacitated, I think the thing I lose is my ability to think because if I stop, I actually had a ligament tear recently,
Okay.
which affected my ability to walk, and that was the most depressing 1 month of my life because I just couldn't think.
Absolutely.
It's
Oh shit.
my thinking is so dependent
Thinking is
on my
dependent
walking.
on the legs. Ideas
Yeah.
have legs, and so do Palash's thoughts. I'm very curious because Mumbai as a city, this is also such a close cause to me, walkability, and the Mumbai Walking Project exists, and so many other NGOs and NPOs are doing their bit to ensure walkability. But yes, please do support walkability. When it comes to the city infrastructure, because Palash can write better stories than.
So this may sound a little braggy
Right.
given we are in Bombay,
Right.
but the place where I live
Right.
is a penthouse.
Oh wow.
And so I have like a private terrace where I get my own walking space. Without that, believe me,
Yeah.
it would have been a terrible, terrible thing. I
Sure.
got, it's not like I'm very rich that I can afford a
Right.
penthouse,
Right.
but I got a very sweet deal
You got a
8
sweet deal.
years back.
8 years back.
And
Okay,
I
so it's
haven't,
clearly it's. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
You haven't moved.
I haven't moved since. I've tried 3 times on 3 different occasions to move.
Wow.
But I think I don't want to jinx it, but I
Yeah.
think it's probably the best flat you can get in Bombay for the price that I
For the
paid for it.
price. Okay, we have to.
So it's and precisely right
Yeah.
because otherwise it's very difficult to walk.
Very
in
difficult
Bombay.
to walk in Bombay.
Especially if you sweat like a pig, like I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
It's it's very difficult.
It's
So
it's
my
not the
terrace
easiest.
gives me a very safe space to
Yeah.
walk
Yeah.
and think essentially.
Walk thinking, right? That's definitely then again, folks, writing and thinking, right? It's linked. I would say it's definitely linked even for me, right? I'd love to know how other folks, if they have walking and writing or any other processes. People use voice notes. That's interesting as well. But Balash, what about your inspiration, right? Because I'm very fascinated that you have this process, of course. And what I love about people like you and other multi hyphenates or people who are interested in multiple things is that it's not that you're getting inspired only by media, right? It's not that you're only writing about media. You can perhaps read history, right? Or you can listen to a podcast. So I'd love to hear some shout outs or some inspiration points that you might like. Again, not as a mandatory reading list, but something that very weird that inspires your curiosity. Arey, this YouTube channel which speaks about meals in the 1920s, but that actually inspired me. So give me like a sense of your of your consumption universe, as it were, and how it sort of helps.
One of the reasons why I quit my jobs and started doing this is I noticed that I would die for the weekends to come when I was working,
Yeah.
right? And what I would do on my weekends were amazing for me because I would read, I would write, I would just consume a lot of media from all over the world, from all across
Nice.
themes. And I sort of thought that if I can do the stuff that I do on weekends, on weekdays, and somehow monetize my life,
Yeah.
I'll be the happiest.
Yeah.
And that's actually the pole star, right? Which is how can I monetize what I love doing, which I would anyway do if no one was paying me for it, right?
Sure.
And what I love doing is just like reading and consuming all sorts of stuff like history, science, and all that. So, my YouTube recommendation
Yeah.
is like, it's
I'm interested for this one.
quintessential meme of, Honey Singh with
Yeah.
David Foster Wallace. So it's so I so let me just take it media type by media type. Let's begin with podcast, for example.
Sure.
I love Acquired.
Of course,
I
classic.
think probably my favorite podcast. Acquired obviously is about, I mean, you can link it, but it's like
Yeah,
it's history of
business
companies and like
companies. Yeah,
4 or 5 hour histories of companies. Amazing, amazing podcast. I love Empire podcast. I was
mm.
actually listening to it on the way to here, which is William Dalrymple and
Dalrymple.
Anita Anand just doing these mini series about the Ottoman Empire and
Yeah,
like 20 episodes on the Ottoman Empire.
the
It's
British
really
Raj.
good.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
It's also the chemistry between the two
the
that's
two.
just
Very
incredible.
interesting. Yeah.
Uh, I like the Founders podcast too. I don't
Mm.
listen to it that often, but love it. Uh, so that's on the podcast side. These two are the main podcasts that I
Sure.
consume. I also, the All In podcast and
Of
a lot of
course.
all these
Of course.
podcasts that I consume. But I think if I were to recommend two, it would be the Empire podcast and Acquired.
Sure.
Uh, YouTube channels. I mostly consume like sciencey stuff on YouTube.
Mhm.
So there is this channel called Three Blue One Round.
Of course.
Yeah,
Of course.
right, which
Yes,
is
the
which is
math
amazing.
and the yeah, I love the animations as well.
Veritasium is amazing.
Of course.
Just love that guy's storytelling.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think the
yeah.
way he's able to. There's also the podcast. There's also this channel called Manufacturing Intellect. I think it's a very old channel, but it keeps adding videos. I think that's also a
Yeah,
very good
yeah,
YouTube channel. So YouTube is mostly about like sciencey stuff
yeah.
and
Interesting.
reading. Again, reading is all over the place, but right now I've been reading a lot of history and a lot of
Nice.
stuff on India.
Nice.
Uh, I think sometime last year I read V.S. Naipaul's
Of
trilogy
course.
on India, and I think
That's the
I
classic.
recommend it
Yeah.
to everyone. It's
Yeah.
also a little controversial
Hmm.
because not everyone agrees with what V.S.
Mm.
Naipaul had to say on India, especially. But it really opened up my eyes, and I also love his writing, like just
Right.
the prose
Right. Right.
that Naipaul has.
Right.
It's incredible. Like I
Sure.
always, whenever someone asks me, like when they ask me writing questions about, I always tell them read Naipaul.
Naipaul. Yeah.
It's just
On
like
India.
brilliant prose the way
Brilliant
he
prose.
writes. And films are, I mean, that's my principal passion. So films are, I have now sort of begun to avoid consciously films that were made in the last 15-20 years because
Mm.
I think they are imbued with a very different kind of ideology that
Mm.
sort of, it sort of ruins the experience for me a little.
Right.
So I try to watch films from before 2010, from before 2005.
Sure.
And same with novels, fiction.
Right.
I think I've just decided that I'm not going to read fiction from the last 15-20 years. I think
Right.
only fiction that was written, or even as old as like the classics. I think when I was sort of growing up, I had this derisive attitude towards classics because I
Right.
was like, why not read current
Sure.
stuff?
Sure.
But when I started reading
The classics for a
I
reason.
I
Yeah.
think it was exactly
Yeah.
classics for a reason. And so I missed a lot. I missed reading a lot of classics, and I think I'm going back to
Yeah.
some of them.
Have you tried out Infinite Jest?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a book which it's actually a book. I don't know. Did you ask that question because we've spoken about it, or
No, we haven't spoken about it yet.
Oh,
But
Infinite Jest is a very important book to me.
yeah,
I read it in 2000.
you mentioned David Foster Wallace. That's why I asked. Actually, yeah.
No, David Foster Wallace in general is a very
Sure.
important person to
Same.
me. But he's someone who I have sort of grown, like he's not someone I think a lot about now.
Sure.
But there was a time when he inspired me a lot.
Sure.
And Infinite Jest was obviously
Of
the
course.
book that started it all. It took me a year to read that book.
It's not the easiest to read. I can
It's not,
assure you that.
I think it was, I think my third attempt that I finally finished it. But yeah, I've read Infinite Jest.
Nice.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
You don't see why it's amazing when you
Yeah.
start reading it
Yeah.
because it's very difficult.
Yeah.
But when you finish it and when you start thinking about it,
Yeah.
I think I actually wouldn't recommend it because I think in the time that it takes you to read Infinite Jest, you can probably read 20 other books.
Sure.
I think part of the reason why I started reading it was this, nerdism. That,
Yeah,
my
yeah, yeah.
God, I want to finish this
Sure,
tome of a
sure.
book and so that I
Yeah.
can brag about it.
Yeah.
But you realize that it's too big a cost to pay
It
to
is.
brag because
is.
it's really
Sure.
difficult. But I think that book is very relevant today because to the audience who may not have read the book. The book is about our obsession with media, our obsession with entertainment,
Yeah.
and how that could sort of stultify our collective consciousness, and how that could sort of numb us to what real life is.
Yeah.
And he wrote it. He set the book in 2007, and unfortunately, he died
Yeah.
2007, 2008. Right, tragically
Yeah.
took his own life.
Yeah.
But if he had existed in this
Oh,
era
man.
of reels and shots, my God, I can
He would have a
suggest
thing
that.
to say.
Yeah, man. And also, I mean, talking of prose, right?
Yeah.
Just like his writing is so delicious,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I was reading a Substack. A friend on Twitter. He writes a Substack. I don't remember his name.
Yeah.
Maybe I can send you the link later. But
Yeah.
he wrote this. He was reading A Pale King, which is another novel by
Right.
David, unfinished novel because
Right.
he took his life before he finished it. And David Foster Wallace is famous for writing these very long
Of
sentences that
course.
go on for like pages and pages.
Extreme of
And
consciousness.
this
Yeah.
guy I was reading, his first line went on for like a page, and I was like, "You're clearly reading David Foster Wallace," because it's very difficult to resist, to insulate yourself from his style of writing when you read,
Right.
because it's so seductive and it's
Right.
so addictive to
Right.
write the way
Right.
he writes. And obviously, a lot of people try to copy his style, but
Sure.
they are cheap
Yeah.
cheap fakes that
Yeah.
nobody really comes close to
Yeah.
his prose. But yeah, huge David for I mean, I would still call myself a huge David Foster
Was a Wallace fan. Yeah.
but about 5 years back, I was a fanatic.
Okay.
I think now I have
Interesting.
sort of my love for him has matured, and I
Yeah.
also see the flaws and
Yeah.
the shortcomings of his style of thinking and
Yeah.
his worldview.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
huge
Fascinating. No, I
David
think
fan.
for me, more than I think authors, it's been for me, music has been a big part of my sort of upbringing. Big, hip hop, of course, and the Arctic Monkeys as well, of course, in the whole rock genre, and how they also sort of and they're capturing. Great book recommendation is Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Yeah, in fact,
Yeah.
David Foster Wallace himself talks about this
Yeah. Yeah.
quite a bit.
Correct.
Came out, I think, in 80s or 90s, right?
I think so. I think
And
so. That
probably the
time,
writer was talking about television.
but it's so relevant
Yeah, I
to.
mean, now we have sort of the thermonuclear version of television.
Yeah, the thermonuclear version of television. I love that. I love that. Okay, super.
So,
I want to double click on this, Palash, because we've touched upon, and of course, Ted Joya, one of my favorite writers, The Honest
Yeah.
Broker, speaks about jazz, music, literature, films, everything. A bit of investments as well, I guess, a bit of the business side. About culture, right? He speaks about how culture has dried out, how it's flattened, how because of tech coming in, the entire our entire environment has become extremely
Correct.
tech first, and we were I think the Atlantic said that it's a aristocracy, but it's like a tech, like it's basically tech is the monarch now,
Yes,
right?
correct.
So but what do you think about this, right? Because again, do you think our definition of culture has changed, or do you think that it's actually a very true thing कि नहीं नहीं यार culture is मतलब खत्म है सब reels के लिए people are just making things, or do you still think that no it exists, it's just that perhaps we're not we haven't defined it in a better way yet? So what is your a very macro view on what culture is?
I think a lot of skepticism that exists about stuck culture, and what Ted Joy also talks about, which I've also written about, is mostly it's very over-indexed on cinema and films. And
Interesting.
that is because if you go back to the 70s, right, movies used to be the mainstream,
Yeah.
right? Uh, there's a joke that back in 70s and 80s, everyone had two jobs. One was what they did, and second was a movie critic. Everyone was a movie critic.
Right.
And now if you look at cinema and movies, right, it's largely become a niche activity.
Yeah. Agree.
If you take, the global box office, give or take, is about 35 to 40 billion dollars, which is not a huge number
At all.
given
Yeah.
the scheme of things, right?
Absolutely.
Google, I think, reported its year-end earnings, and it did $100 billion of profits, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
Double check me on that. But
Yeah.
that just gives you an idea
Of the
the
scale and
and that sort of shows you that cinema and movies have been pushed to a niche,
right.
and obviously, I mean, to the detriment of the culture, right?
Yeah.
Because movies are amazing. All of
Yeah.
us love movies,
Yeah.
right? And the kind of, and I mean, the more depressing part is that from that 35 to 40 billion dollars of global box office, if you take the collective box office of the top 15 films, it would contribute probably 30% of all the global box office. Right?
Yeah.
And all these 15 films will be remakes or sequels
Yeah.
or franchise films, or, and I think that's what has sort of contributed to the the gloom and doom that we see,
Yeah.
which is warranted. I think we should talk about it. So to answer your question, I think culture has changed. For example, we just talked about, when you asked my recommendations,
Yeah.
I started with YouTube channels
Yeah.
and podcasts, right?
Yeah.
And it's not to say that they are a lower form of art.
Yeah.
They occupy your mind space, my mind space, all of our mind space in a very creative manner, right?
Yeah.
So that has become part of the culture. That is how people are spending a big part of their time.
Absolutely.
And so it's going to push some of the other incumbents to the side, right? So I think culture has definitely changed. Culture is the creative consciousness of the world, right?
Lovely.
What is it that we are thinking about? What is the prevalent ideology of the time? What is the
Right.
prevalent thinking patterns and mega trends of the time? And that is influenced by the things that you consume, the things
Yeah.
that you allow your mind to think about, right?
Right.
And that is, it is all types of media that we spoke about. Fiction, reading, movies have sort of relinquished their space to some of these other newer, and we have to encompass them if we talk
Yeah.
about culture.
Yeah.
Coming to movies, I think uh, it's just, and I think I also write in one of my pieces that the incentives have changed, which is
Yeah.
what's
Absolutely.
happened is, as we talk that it's only 35 to 40 billion dollars on global box office, the cost of making a film has not come down,
Yeah.
has in fact increased or remained the same.
Sure.
Until that this imbalance exists, I think we are going to be facing that problem.
Yeah.
Uh, and because making a film is still so expensive, there is a lot of debt on the books of all the giant studios, right,
Yeah.
in India or abroad, right?
Yeah.
And if you have a lot of debt, again, comes back to risk, right? If you have a lot of debt, if you have to, I think Disney has close to some, or Warner Brothers has close to some $40 billion of debt on their
Insane.
books, right?
Insane.
And so if you have to make your debt payments every month, every year, you will try to minimize your risk. And what that translates into is to see, okay, uh, DC universe brings us a lot of money.
So let's
So let's
double
just
down on
keep
that.
doing the same again for many years to come, because that is guaranteed to give us some money which will help us pay off this debt.
Yeah.
And so there is no risk taking, there is no creative risk taking, because you have to manage the financial risk. And so
Absolutely.
the incentives are all messed up, right? And so the executives at the helm of all these studios are basically glorified debt managers, right? I mean, that's
Insane.
precisely
Wow. I
what it
love
is, right?
that.
They are not creative risk takers or allocators of capital on creative projects, which is what the job is.
Right.
They are debt managers, and
Wow.
when that becomes your primary incentive, and that is what gives you the bonus at the end of the year, your behavior is going to be geared towards
Yeah.
how do I make those debt payments, which means how do I make the safest movie possible
Wow.
that will give me my $500 million
Yeah.
on box
Yeah.
office.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's a cycle. I don't think movies are going to die.
Yeah.
I think they will remain niche,
Yeah.
I believe, like how they have become.
Yeah.
But I think movies are going to be around. And I think it's also the filmmakers. I always give Christopher Nolan's example. He always says that before he became a filmmaker, he had a very clear idea about the 8 or 9 films that he wanted to make. But as he started making films, he all the films that he's made are very different from the 8 or 9
Sure.
films that
Sure.
he had
Envisioned. Yeah.
envisioned, right? And that is because the underlying culture changed beneath his feet. And he thought it was his job to cater to that culture, to
Sure.
not sort of be very stubborn about, oh, this is my vision and this is what I want to do,
Yeah.
which is an attitude that most filmmakers have,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
most auteurs have.
Yeah.
But I think if Oppenheimer was able to make $1 billion, a film
Hmm.
that's about making of a bomb
Yeah.
partly, and then
Yeah.
a congressional hearing or
Yeah.
something, the most boring things that
Yeah.
you can think about. Because I think he was able to adapt it to our modern sensibilities. And I
Hmm.
think that also needs to happen. The creative side of the filmmakers and writers also need to
Yeah.
understand that you are not competing with other films anymore, like was the case 20, 30 years back.
You're
But
competing
you're
with other
competing
phone
with
now.
shows, you're competing with reels, you're competing with YouTube videos, with podcasts. Don't compromise on your vision.
Hmm.
But the syntax has to change
Absolutely.
in some way.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
that syntax is, I do not know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a
That's
quest,
yeah.
but I think that quest needs to begin. I think that's what will.
Yeah.
You can't be stubborn and you can say I'm going to make what I want to make, and then people
Yeah.
will come. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. Okay, that's fascinating, and that's really many goosebump moments out there, because it just helps me frame so many things that I feel about the media and entertainment space and culture as well. I think the way I also look at it is just, how plays, of course, plays were at one point of time, they were, entertainment for the masses, right? Like
Yeah,
people used to have plays, and then of course it became this very, Prithvi Theatre and Juhu, like, select few will watch Nasruddin Shah and
yeah,
Ratna Pathak Shah sort of do their plays, and they'll have the repeats. I think with indie films as well, like, for whatever reason, because the mass entertainment is in your pocket, right? That's the form of mass entertainment that we had earlier. It was films. Now it's basically people on scrolling. Now it's people,
yeah.
they have their own. And that's why I think, definitely a big shout out to the YouTube Culture and Trends report of, I think, 2023 or 2022, which spoke about this, how culture has been fragmented, right? We used to have a monoculture, and now everybody's definition of what's happening, the consciousness, and their YouTube feed. And of course, we have to, obviously give our hat tips, as it were, to TikTok and the recommendation algorithms, because whatever you want to see, it's going to feed you more of that. It's going to understand you, and it's personalized, your entire feed. So that to me is also fascinating, how that's become mass entertainment. That mass entertainment is in your pocket.
Yeah, and I don't think there is a lot of elitist contempt
Yeah,
towards the online media
yeah,
culture, so
yeah,
to speak. I think, and a lot of people talk about how dumb it's making our
yeah,
kids, and
yeah,
how removed they are from reality. But I think it works both ways, which
yeah.
is, if it has the power to make kids dumb, so to speak, and there's definitely a bit of that. I mean, with Jonathan Haidt book, uh, what's the name? I forgot the name of the book,
Yeah.
but he basically essentially makes the case that that the smartphone generation is being stultified because of
Correct.
this. But I think there's also the other side of it, which is it has given access to information and ideas to people at such a young age that I think the top 10%
Yeah.
of the new generation is way smarter than the top
Mm,
10% of our generation, or
sure.
generations that came before. And I think that keeps happening. I think what happens is it becomes extreme at the end. The middle sort of
Mm,
remains the same. But I think all this information overload, while it may be detrimental to some level, I think people who make the right use of it, people who know how to draw boundaries between real life and the things that they can extract from this, I think they are going to be doing really well
yeah, yeah.
in the future. Yeah,
I love that. I love the whole thing about the median, right? Because again, it's like a knife, right? Like, how do you use it? You can either, use it for a good cause, or for a, I mean, you can use it to cut a vegetable, or you can use it to butter the bread. Stuff like that. Basically saying that, okay, it's really up to the kids, and the smart ones really have
correct,
an
correct.
advantage here, and can really sort of take it ahead from there. Talking about smart kids, Palash, you yourself have embraced this new media, creatorship, and this entire independent lifestyle. I myself, went independent in April 2023 now. Wow. Yeah, it's been 2 years. What's that like? Tell us a bit about Cosm as well, right? That's your sort of banner, and that's your, entire outfit. What's the structure like, and what do you sort of do with these brands and these clients and whatnot?
So it's right. I mean, I do a bunch of things in
Yeah,
Cosm, and mostly Cosm is just a business wrapper around
sure,
me,
sure,
effectively.
sure.
Uh, so I told you about the show that I'm writing,
Of
right? So
course.
that's also I mean, so that's one thing that I'm doing.
Sure.
The other thing is I do a bit of consulting for
Sure.
clients and for brands and for individuals. And
Right.
these are basically people who are facing the same problems that I was facing 2 years
Oh,
back,
nice.
which is uh, I have a lot inside me.
Mm.
I think I'm creative.
Mm.
I want to create, but I don't know where to begin, how to start, what to do. And I think there are a lot of people facing that right
Yeah.
now. So I work with, and same is true for brands that, people
Sure.
who, yeah, I mean, we can create Instagram reels, we can create Instagram ads, but we also want to create long form
Sure.
IP, right? To basically create that salience, to build a brand around it.
Absolutely.
And so that's what I do. I work with brands, I work with individuals for my consulting, and I do end-to-end content strategy and production for them.
Super.
Uh, what I want to do though, like what is, and there's also, I spoke about the podcast that I've been working on,
Yeah.
which hopefully should be out by the time this podcast is out,
Right.
if all goes well. So that's the other thing that I've been working on, which is also a production of Cosm. Cosm is effectively just a wrapper around me, I mean,
Yeah.
so to speak. I hire people on
On
project to
projects.
project
Sure.
basis,
Sure.
basically, because all projects are different. Some require just me,
Yeah.
some require a full suit audio
Yeah.
production
Yeah.
unit, which requires me to hire a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Then, if you ask me what is Cosm, it's very hard for me to define right now.
Sure.
The easiest way to define is just a wrapper around me. It's a
Yeah.
business entity
Yeah.
which goes on the top of all the invoices that I
Of
charge.
course. Of course.
That's its functional
Yeah.
utility. But what I want to do is I'm also, I mean, one of the things that allowed me
Yeah.
to quit my job and do this
Yeah.
full time is because I had become very interested in investing,
Sure.
and my investment sort of gave me the financial security that I
Mm.
don't need to worry about money for some time.
Sure.
I had saved and I had invested whatever I'd earned very
Sure.
prudently. And what I want to do is, that's the long short of it, right?
Of
Which
course.
is, I also want to spin this off as an investment vehicle later. Obviously, that's many years away, but that's the flywheel that I want to
Yeah.
sort of get
Yeah.
going.
It's fascinating you mentioned that, Bash, because that is literally what I have. Of course, I haven't released the name of my creative studio yet, which is again basically the same model where I'll be a rapper like a creative studio, which is different from an agency, because I think the agency model itself is a bit flawed, where you have to have people on your payrolls and then you have to do clients just because you have a excessive supply of talent.
Yes.
Right. So I think that mismatch itself was something I was not willing to take up, and that's a model that I much prefer, which is a independent studio model, which I also love. And again, hopefully, getting investments and venture also in the mix after a few years. That's there. One question, or one like almost like a tag to this is, do you, whenever you're writing your piece, is it also a bit of a flywheel ki chalo, if people discover my piece, they would want to work with me or they would want to ask with me? Is that a conscious thing that you do with your newsletter?
It definitely happens.
Hmm.
What I write, even what I tweet, whatever, it ends up going to the right places, and that opens up a lot of doors for me.
Yeah.
But I didn't start doing it consciously, but it just happened. I mean, and I realized, man, this is the best thing, right? Because uh, my writing, whether it's tweeting or whether it's doing the newsletter or now the podcast, is my as I said, my goal was, how can I monetize what I was doing on weekends and
Mm.
do it on the weekdays, right? And that's been the goal throughout, and that's what I'm doing, right? And so even the tweeting is very, it's not planned at all.
Yeah.
An idea strikes my mind, and that's why it's very, there is no theme to my
Yeah.
Twitter, right? It's all over the place.
Sure.
It's everything. Uh, but I think what happens is, when people read a tweet or read a newsletter and they like it, they like the way you think,
Mm.
and that makes, then you don't need to sell to them. And
Yeah, exactly.
if they have something that you can help them with, you don't need to sell yourself. And that's the best, right? Because
Exactly. Agree.
I'm not sure if I'm a very good salesman.
Yeah.
So it started happening, to answer your question. It wasn't conscious, and
Wasn't
now,
conscious, but it's
but it is an incentive to keep doing it. It is an incentive for me to not stop on creating, because it sort of also fuels in the flywheel. But yeah, I think my focus, while I'm doing a lot of consulting, I've become very selective about it, because there's a lot of creation that I'm doing on my own now.
Of course.
With the show, with the podcast, with the writing, with everything.
Yeah.
So
tell me about it.
I actually have this framework, because you mentioned agency, right? So I started Cosm as a tech product, where I was creating this SaaS marketplace which would connect creators into brands, right? So something like Upwork, but specifically for catering to the marketing or the creative industry. The reason I was actually doing it is because, again, I wasn't being gutsy enough to make the plunge, because I was like, okay, I know people in the VC ecosystem. I have qualifications in business. It'll be very easy for me to raise venture investment for this. Right? And I was sort of lying to myself, okay, but you're still doing something in the creative industry. So you're still sort of scratching that itch. But, and then I soon abandoned the idea, because I realized that, that this is not what I want to do. I want to be a creator. And as I have sort of explored that idea before, I've come up with this framework, which is, in general, in the creative industry, the person or the entity that captures the most value is the creator, right? And everything else is a wrapper around the creator. So to give you an example, if it's an ad agency, the protein is the writers and the creative director, right? Everything else, the production outfit, everything else is just a wrapper around it to sort of dress that the main thing and make money, right? So if you want to enter the creative industry, always be the creator. Don't try to become a rapper, right? Because I mean, you see it everywhere. You take a film. Every film has an ATL budget and a BTL budget.
Absolutely.
The ATL budget is about 50%. BTL is 50%. ATL is the top actors and the director, right?
Correct.
Who brings the value? To take a very extreme example to drive the point home, Oppenheimer made $1 billion, right? Who made the most money from Oppenheimer? Obviously, Christopher Nolan, even though it had all these big stars.
Sure.
So, if you want to enter the creative industry, always be the creator, or always be the one who's making creative decisions. Don't be a rapper that either provides operations or distribution or anything else.
Because that can be commoditized. Is that
exactly, that can be commoditized, and you'll always find people who can do it better. Obviously, unless you are world class at it. So, like, I was reading about Michael Ovitz, the legendary talent agent of Hollywood, right?
Of course.
Who founded CA.
Of course.
Unless you are Michael Ovitz is essentially a rapper around creative, because he's a talent agent.
Sure.
So unless you are someone like Michael Ovitz, who has probably the best salesman in the world, if you want to enter the creative industry, don't be a rapper, be the protein. Don't try and be gravy, because you'll not capture value.
Super.
And so, coming back to what I was trying to do, I was trying to be a rapper. I was trying to
be a marketplace. And
and it may work in other industries, but it doesn't work in the creative industry.
Super. Okay. Wow, that is invaluable advice. Really, I think folks listening to this and watching this, really, so much to take away, and so much to really this point. Don't be the gravy. I think that's this is water moment, I feel. This is like similar to that, I would say. Fascinating. No, I was actually going to ask you for some sort of advice or some ways of thinking, or some, again, frameworks and mental models, and you very graciously answered it right away itself. Perhaps my last question before the very fun rapid fire round is about shoutouts, right? Any Indian creators, because of course that's what she said, is for whatever reason became of course, because the creators featured as well on Twitter, became was shared quite a bit, a few episodes and a few clips. So any Substack writers from India, I would say, so that they can also feel nice about this entire thing internationally as well. But folks let's say consume a lot on Twitter, and you'd like to sort of give them a thinky, or hey, you know what, I love your tweets, I love your pieces.
Newsletters, I mean, I don't think they need a shout out, because they are a huge newsletter now, but I love Tiger Feathers.
Of course.
Rahul
yes.
and Ariman. I've also worked with them briefly, and I think they do a terrific job of,
absolutely.
I've not told this to them, but I see their articles as these optimism pills on India, because they are
Sure.
so optimistic on India, and you don't get that very often. There is one specific piece that I definitely want to talk about is Ariman's piece on how the UPI story,
Absolutely.
the India
Yeah.
stack basically
India
got
stack.
founded, right? And I
Yeah.
think it's
It's
called
fascinating.
a bunch of patriotic Indians bet on Moore's law and that
Yeah.
sort of thing and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
I go back to that piece because it makes me optimistic about India.
Yeah.
That if that can happen, if non-government individuals can just put together something that is world class and something that no other country has been able to
Yeah.
replicate, I think we can do other great things.
Yeah.
So definitely Tiger
Tiger
Feathers.
Feathers. Absolutely. Shout out to Rahul. Yeah.
And Rahul and Ariman, both
Yeah.
of
Rahul
them
and
very good
Araman.
writers.
Yes.
Twitter accounts, many man, but let me think of like smaller accounts which are
Sure.
not very popular. My favorite Twitter account is Dylan O'Sullivan, not Indian, I know.
Uh-huh.
I think he works for what the name, but he tweets a lot about Dostoevsky and
Right.
generally very close to like what I tweet about.
Right.
But do follow Dylan O'Sullivan. I mean, I'm sure most of you do because he's a
Right.
huge Twitter account.
Right.
On India, I mean, they are not big Twitter accounts, but there is an account called Mudit FX.
Right.
His name is Mudit. He tweets a lot about history.
Okay.
Really love his content.
Yeah.
He reads a lot of history, especially Indian history and an etymology of words and
Oh,
phrases.
I love that. Yeah.
Really enjoy
Yeah.
reading him. There is a very esoteric account called Shape Grifter.
Okay.
I don't think I think it's a woman. I think it's an anonymous account, but I think she has really cool tweets,
Okay.
really cool ideas. Both of these are fairly small accounts,
Sure.
but I really enjoy reading them. And who else? Why don't you give some recommendations on Twitter? Like very small accounts which
Yeah.
less than 2,000 followers or so, or even less than 1,000 followers. But
I love. I mean, of course, Indian Pixels doesn't need an introduction, but just
oh yeah, correct.
Ashris, yeah, the way that he sort of talks about and just visualizes India and the data
Yeah.
that's happening is great.
I love Josh Dholani.
Yes.
Huge
Yes.
account,
Of course,
but
just
again,
there.
doesn't need my shout out.
Yeah.
I will also recommend this small niche account called Elon Musk.
Oh, Elon Musk, I think I've heard of. Yeah.
He can do with some
He
publicity
can. Yeah, you really need some and some money or some
and
donations
some
as well.
money and
Yeah.
donations. Do subscribe to him. I think
Yeah.
he
I
really
think
needs some money.
he really needs some.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm sure if I
Yeah.
think there will be many,
Of course,
but
same. Yeah, I think a bunch of them, but
yeah.
yeah, but Twitter's great, and overall, are you bullish on the independent creator, the
Yeah,
model,
man.
and
I think that is. I mean, one of the things that this has done is it's allowed everyone from we are shooting in your house and
yeah,
you're
yeah,
going out, right? It's given us this ability to
yeah,
just create and basically, I mean, just to go back to that framework of create of rapper and the creator,
yeah,
I think the the thickness of the wrapper that's required to get the creator out is
mm,
reducing day by day, and all
lovely,
you need is you just need to be a creator and you have all these platforms and all these avenues and all these ready-made wrappers available
yeah,
that you can use your creativity to sort of like boost your signal.
super,
Twitter is one, for example, right?
yeah,
I mean, you just need to type shit out and
yeah,
things happen. So
yeah,
I'm very bullish, man. I mean, I think that's the future.
yeah,
And I think the legacy media industries of movies and music, and they are also, I think movies is going to be the last one because as I said, it still costs it's very capital intensive.
yeah,
And I think that's going to be the last bastion. But who knows, with AI and everything, I think
yeah,
that bastion will also fall,
yeah, yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff happening from the YouTube to Hollywood pipeline as well, and of course music. We've already seen the independent movement there. So yeah, I think long live independent creators. And Palash, a wonderful conversation we've had. We are not done yet because we'll be taking a break. You are starting your own podcast, right? Tell us about the format. Tell us about the way you're sort of thinking about things. What's that like?
Yeah, so the podcast is called All Risk is Creative,
Mhm.
from the piece that we just spoke about, and every episode is about one person from history, from philosophy, from business, from entertainment, all over, all sorts of sectors and industries and themes and backgrounds, who took some risk, and because of that risk, the world changed for the better. And the central idea of the podcast is that when the moment of taking the risk comes, there are two voices in your head, right? There is this one voice that drowns you in data and tells you how stupid it is to take
Yeah.
the risk, right?
Sure.
But whenever someone does end up taking a risk, it's always a creative decision. It's always because that person decides to not listen to that voice and listen to this other voice that tells them that what if you do this
Mm.
and what if you exercise the way you see the world,
Sure.
what happens? And every great thing that has happened in the world is because people decided to listen to this second voice
Lovely.
and not listen to the first voice of reason and logic, right?
Lovely.
And that's why all risk is creative, right? Because the essential act of risk taking
Yeah.
is a creative decision.
Sure.
It's not a rational decision, right?
Right.
And so every episode is about one person from all these different. To give you an example, the first episode is on PV Narasimha Rao,
Okay. Interesting.
the prime minister who liberalized
Yes.
India's economy, right? And the fact that you and I are able to have this conversation
Yeah.
with Sony cameras and road
Road
mics,
mics.
all these foreign companies, is
Sure.
because PV Narasimha Rao took that risk. And it was a risk because prime ministers before him,
Hmm.
quite notably Rajiv Gandhi, who had gotten the biggest mandate
Yeah.
in any election, right,
Yeah.
had tried to do the same, but they had failed because they
Hmm.
couldn't navigate the politics of it, right? And two prime ministers that came after Rajiv Gandhi also tried to do the same and failed.
Sure. Sure.
And so if you were PV Narasimha Rao in 1991, you had all these external pressure, debt and all that, and you took the risk of doing it knowing the data that you had, that everyone else
Every other
before
has
me had
failed.
failed, including Rajiv Gandhi, who
Sure.
had gotten the biggest mandate, but you still took the risk, right?
Yeah.
And it changed everything.
Yeah.
We are the products of liberal India,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's the moment that I'm interested in. What went
Super.
inside his mind, and
Super.
why did he decide to take this risk when very easily
He could have.
he
Yeah.
could have just
Yeah.
let it be, because that's what had happened
That's
before him.
sure.
Then there are episodes on Howard Schultz, who founded Starbucks.
Of
Right?
course.
The fact that cafe culture that is so ubiquitous today, it owes a debt because Howard Schultz in 1970s took a risk which paid off handsomely and literally changed the culture of the
Culture.
world.
Yeah.
And every
Absolutely.
cafe that you go to today owes a debt to Howard
To
Schultz and the
Starbucks.
risk that
Yeah.
he took.
Yeah.
And then there are episodes on Dave Chappelle, on Socrates back in the history.
Wow. Okay. I
Because
love the
so
diversity
it's just
from
so it's
Chappelle to
just all over.
Socrates. Yeah.
Because risk is a very
Yeah.
fundamental human concept, right?
Absolutely.
So Socrates literally died for the risk he
Yeah.
took, because he was tried for corrupting the youth
Sure.
of Athens, and now
Sure.
the entire canon of Western philosophy is based on
Based on
Socrates. And
Socrates.
so he paid the price for the risk he took.
Yeah.
But if he hadn't taken the risk, the world would definitely have been a different
Yeah.
place. So every episode explores
Yeah.
risk takers and what it did to the world.
Amazing. And I'm hoping we can find this on all platforms.
Yes, all platforms, and hopefully by the time this podcast
Yeah.
comes out, the podcast would have released.
Okay, on that note, Palash, we will end our formal segment of episode 61 of That's What She Said. We will now take a break. You won't realize it, but we will refresh ourselves and be back for a very fun rapid fire. We'll see you soon. Okay, folks, we are back after our short break. After a little makhana, loo, and water break, we have quenched our thirst, but we still have a rapid fire segment left. Palash, simple rules. It'll be a mixture of this or that questions and a bit of one-liners. If you let's say choose X or Y, you'll have to say X because one line.
Yeah.
And again, the rule of a rapid fire is that you got to be rapid. So don't think too
And is
much.
there a hamper too?
Makhana is the hamper.
Oh,
Yeah,
awesome.
you're already having the
good a
hamper,
Yeah.
and hopefully if we have
Also,
more
I'm not competing
sponsors,
with anyone. So
you're not
I'm guessing
competing.
I'm
Yeah,
the de
you're
facto winner.
already the winner. There is no other person. This is unfortunately or fortunately not Coffee with Karan, but we will hopefully have some sponsors joining in as well. Also, by the way, do subscribe to our YouTube channel if you've been watching so far and if you've been enjoying our conversation. So do that and hit the like button as well. Okay, Palash, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. First up, Indore or Mumbai?
Mumbai.
Why?
It's just, it allows me to be myself more than Indore does.
Tarantino or Nolan?
Nolan.
Why?
More diverse in his syntax and his tone
Yeah.
than Tarantino.
Fair.
Not that he's also amazing.
Sure. Podcasts or novels?
Novels.
Why?
because I mean it's hard to compare, but novels allow you can just get lost in them.
Mm,
Uh, Podcasts, not all podcasts are like that.
fair. Hopefully, this one is. Your guilty pleasure to watch.
Endlessly watching clips from films that I love.
Mm,
So like The Social Network or
mm,
The Big Lebowski
yeah.
or just like films that I have watched many times
Yeah.
and they don't add anything to my life, but I just keep watching them again.
I love that they don't add anything to my life. Your guilty pleasure to eat. What do you like? I want to snack on this, or I'm like, screw the calories.
Well, I am, not to brag, but I'm pretty strict about what I eat,
That's
but
why. That's why I wanted to have a guilty pleasure question here.
I just love like very fatty North Indian food, like
Okay,
butter
like,
chicken and naan and
and dal makhani as well.
dal makhani. Yeah,
Yeah.
just like fatty, oily,
Greasy.
greasy
Yeah.
North Indian food.
Okay, super. I love that. If you were not a content creator, you would be a dot dot dot.
I'd be a management consultant.
Something that he's already been, right?
Yeah.
So it's
I
really
will just continue. I would
discontinued.
be a partner by now, I guess.
You would be a partner at Bain or any of the other companies, perhaps. Okay, one hot take around the media and entertainment industry. Like, do you think that Bollywood is actually like, for example, the family documentaries are actually a sign that Bollywood is back? Whatever, it can be a hot take around anything.
I think there is a golden age of movies that's going to come in the next decade or so.
Love it. Love it. I do have some inklings around this as well, and I do tend to agree with this. You're alone on an island. What are the three things that will keep you entertained? It can be anything. It can be a book, a toy, anything, whatever.
I'm guessing I'm not supposed to say my phone.
You could.
Yeah, I mean, no, but let's make it
Sure.
interesting. I think a book for sure,
Mm-hmm.
a pen and a paper,
Mm-hmm.
and like a ball because I have ADHD and I think I need something to play with all the time.
Sure.
So just like a tennis ball.
Yeah, I love the answers. They're very they're not very literature heavy or like very like I love there's like basic elements like a ball, a paper, a pen. Okay, awesome. And the final question, Vilash, is do you like the name? That's what she said. What can you see for the show? What do you envision for the show henceforth? What do you want to see on the show?
I think you are a terrific interviewer. I mean, I'm
thank
not
you.
saying it because I'm trying to flatter you or but
Yeah.
I think because I've also produced podcasts now,
Sure.
and I think the best quality a podcaster can have is how at ease they put the guest so that the guest can basically spill
Yeah.
whatever even the things that they don't want to talk
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
And I think if you just keep doing this, and also, I mean, so that's one, and second is your, again, this may sound braggy, but I think if you keep bringing in interesting guests like me, I think it's bound to achieve great heights of success, I would say.
Amazing. On that
And I
note,
love the name. That's the first thing I told you.
yeah,
The
yeah,
name
it
is,
is.
the branding is very important. And
That is.
that's
That
what
is.
she said is just,
Yeah.
even Shreemail, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've really utilized and
I've really milked
used
it.
out
Yeah,
your,
my
you should thank our parents on who have named you.
absolutely, absolutely. No, my parents for that. So thank you, my parents, for that. And on that very braggadocious note, I would call the end to this episode, folks. But what a fun conversation, Palash, we've
Awesome,
had.
man. I had such a great time.
Absolutely.
And hopefully many years later we do this again. Or
Absolutely.
actually, as soon as you think it's okay to bring me again.
We'll
I'd be happy
definitely
to
bring
do it.
Palash again. I'm sure folks in the comments would want Palash to come again. And please do wish him all the best of luck for your show,
Thanks, man. Thank
which
you.
is All Risk is Creative. And of course, that little show that you're writing, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be a fun one as well. And we'll obviously keep our eyes peeled for that. And they can follow you on Twitter, LinkedIn, whereabout.
At Bigger Spalash, Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm not that active on Twitter.
Okay.
It's pretty much the only social media platform
Okay.
I'm active on, although I think I should tweet more than what I do. But
Right.
yes, that's where you can follow me, and you can subscribe to my newsletter.
Please do. The link is in the description.
Yeah.
And we will see you for the next episode. Thank you so much for watching.
Awesome, man.
Awesome.